Says ready? Okay. Okay, we're starting the first shir of the year. First shir on Hilchos Kininim, Mekacho Memkar, and the first shir on Siman Kuf Peites. Before we start, just to give you an introduction to the introduction. This is a tshuva from the Tzemach Tzedek, Even Ha'ezer Siman Taf Nun Hey, which was earlier printed in the Piskei Dinim of the Mittler Rebbe, in between Yeridea and Even Ha'ezer. They stuck it in there. Over there was a shaila, a person wanted to be matir a get me'use, we call it a violent get, based on something that he read in the Ramah and Siman Kuf Nun Daled and Even Ha'ezer. The Tzemach Tzedek goes through the psak and says why he doesn't agree why this case should be, get me'use should be permissible. He says there's a lot of details, doesn't want to get into it, but he concludes the tshuva with this statement. Al masha samach rumma alosoi al haramo, the fact that you wanted to rely on the Ramah, ein bozeh shum smicha klal, you can't rely on it. Umizeh yilmoid rumma alosoi, she'ein lismech ala kitzurim, can't rely on summaries. Shulchan Aruch is the hakitzur of the Beis Yosef and the Torah. Shulchan Aruch is essentially a kitzur, Shulchan Aruch. You have to research where it comes from. Ube'emes, Tzemach Tzedek says, Ksheyanti emesh be'haramo, when I search through the Ramah, v'u guf adin shel hagoy, this is the guf adin of what he writes over there. Tomua etzli ma yeshin get v'chulu, I have a question how the get will help in such a scenario. Like the Michtav Melio had questioned the din of the Ramah anyways. V'chipasti beBeis Yosef v'loi motzosi gilui l'din zeh, I searched in the Beis Yosef and I couldn't find any source for this din of the Ramah says. Which means that when you start learning, you learn Shulchan Aruch, it's not enough to just learn Shulchan Aruch with a nice kelim, but you have to learn the Sheresh Adin HaMekayre. So really, you're supposed to learn Shas, but you already learned Shas in Yeshiva. These, especially what you're learning now, that you learned in Bava Metzia, a lot of it. And at least you can learn the Beis Yosef. You see, quotes the Sugyas, you remember what you learned. That's why you got to turn the Shulchan Aruch, not just the Shulchan Aruch. Anyway, let's start the Shulchan Aruch. The halachas begin with a statement. Ein hamekach nigmar b'dvarim. A purchase cannot be completed by words alone. That means a transfer of ownership cannot be effectuated just by talking, just by saying. It could be an agreement between the parties. The seller says he agrees to sell, the buyer says he agrees to buy, the price is set up already, and it's still not considered a sale until there is a kinyan that's done between them. Each thing has its own kinyan. Some things, metaltalin has their own kinyan, karka has its forms of kinyanim, behemoths have their form of kinyan. There are certain kinyanim that work because that's the minhag hamokim, minhag hamedina, but without any form of kinyan, there's no transfer of ownership, even if there is a full-fledged conversation and agreement between the parties to reach the sale or the transfer. But after the kinyan is completed and it's done, neither of them could retract and just say, okay, I'll give you back the money and that's it. And even if one was moichel to another, rather, you need another kinyan to change ownership back from one to another. That means one kinyan was made to transfer ownership from person A to person B. Another kinyan has been made to transfer ownership from person B back to person A. And the fact that the money was returned is not enough to effectuate a transfer of ownership. The Beis Yosef right away adds over here on this din, and what it says in Gemara in Bava Metzia, Machlekes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, if somebody who goes back on his word is a mechusar amana, the halacha is we paskin like Rabbi Yochanan that he is a mechusar amana. But regardless, the Beis Yosef says the fact that he's a mechusar amana does not make him into a person who it doesn't make the purchase complete. Just because you violated one thing doesn't create a transfer of ownership. Yes, you violated and you're mechusar amana. It doesn't mean that the product now gets transferred from one to another. And if there is a transfer of money also, which that's you're going to learn in Siman Reish Daled, then you're not only a mechusar amana, you're also supposed to take upon yourself a mishapara. Because you go to Bezdin and the Bezdin says, mishapara, whoever the Kodesh Baruch Hu who took revenge, who charged the price to the Deir HaMabul and to Anshe Sdoim, he will also take a price from those who don't stand in don't keep up to what they are supposed to do, to what they say they're going to do. Right, now the Bach over here says, if there is a minhag in the city, that the way a purchase is completed that means when somebody buys it's talking about buying barrels. He says when somebody buys a barrel, and the way the purchase is completed is that the store owner writes the name of the purchaser on the barrel, and that is considered a kinyan in this city. Whatever the minhag is, that's considered Gemara Mekach, even though halachically the owner of the barrel did not take possession of the barrel. The barrel only has a name on it. But since the minhag in town is that that's what you do, then that's what you do. And therefore you cannot retract afterwards from this purchase. And the Bach also says, what do you mean you can't retract from the purchase? He says it's even if you returned the shtar to the seller. Because what's the raya that I own something, that I have a shtar, that I bought it? So now the buyer comes and brings back the shtar and says, you give me the money, I'll give you the shtar, and let's cancel the deal. He says it's not enough, but you still need a kinyan to transfer from one to another. Now, because we mentioned the mechusar amana and the mishapara, so I just want to point out the tshuva from the Tzemach Tzedek and Choshen Mishpat Siman Pei Aleph, which is actually in your white books, on page 177, in the spirals, that he says over there towards the end, there's just one line from it, I'm not going through the whole tshuva, that a mechusar amana means somebody who retracted, even though he did shaloi kahoigen, he did something which is not right. If afterwards the lekeach went and grabbed this product from him, the Bezdin takes it out of him. It means that he doesn't create ownership. It's like stealing. Even though the purchaser says, well, you're mechusar amana, I'm going to go grab it from you, I want to complete the deal. Still not enough. Why? Because Tzemach Tzedek says by doing the retraction, he was mechusar amana, by doing the retraction, batel hadibur, the original statement that we spoke is cancelled. And it's ke'ilu lehaya b'neihem dvarim ha'olam, quotes from the Rambam. It says, if nothing has occurred ever between them, no discussion was there. And this is more, it's also in Yeridei Siman Shin Mem Hey, in the Chuvas of Tzemach Tzedek, Yeridei Siman Shin Mem Hey, in Seif Yud Aleph. Now happens to be that this looks like it's three Chuvas, which somehow ended up in three different places in Tzemach Tzedek, but Siman Lametes and Choshen Mishpat, Siman Pei Aleph and Choshen Mishpat, and this Siman Shin Mem Hey in Yeridei all seem to be connected, all continuation one to another. And over there he says, even if you have to accept a mishapara, still by retracting your statement, you have retracted what you are supposed to do. You did something wrong, but the other person cannot go and grab it. Now, let's go through some details that are relevant to this concept of dibur. Huh? No, but the person has it on his head. What do you mean? Just because the Bezdin doesn't say it means the Eibusher is not going to go do it to him?
The Bezdin don't use that. It's never used in Russia. It's quite hard to say it.
But you don't have to say it, yeah. Some say b'chol you don't have to say it, yeah. Yeah, you don't know. Just there's a lot of things we don't do. The Eibishter knows how to settle scores when he needs to. There are 3 books, generational. There's the Knesset Agdela, Mata Shimon, and Dvar Mishpat. Son, grandson, great-grandson, I think, which we quoted in the past many times in Choshen Mishpat. They quote from different halachas from around, like we'll call it the first likutim on these halachas. So the Mata Shimon on this Siman, Nagoy Saturois Beis, brings 3 dinim that are peripherally connected to this halacha of Ein HaMekach Nigmar B'Dvorim. First one, he brings from the Shalos Utshuvas Yochin Ubayaz. There was a person who owed a lot of money to the government, taxes, whatever it is, and the government forced him to sell his house. He had no choice. He was forced by the government to sell his house to pay the debt. And then he went and he was me'arer on it, and basically forced the buyer to give him back the shtar of ownership, and he'll pay him whatever it is. So he says, just because he took the shtar back from him, even though it was based on einus, obviously it's not enough to retract the kinyan. Pretty much the same as a bach, that returning a shtar doesn't create a change of ownership. That's the first din he points out. Second one, he brings from Meri Migash, Siman Kuf Lamed Daled. Reuven bought a house from Shimon in court, means in the legal system, not in the halachic system. And he gave a down payment. Then Reuven went and said he doesn't want to follow through with the sale. He's changing his mind. He's mevatel. What he did, went back to court or to the legal system and canceled the purchase.
He bought it from the Yid, yeah?
He bought it from the Yid. Reuven bought it from Shimon. And he got the money back. Then changed his mind again. No, he doesn't want to buy it. He wants to buy it now. And the Rimigash says that the sale got canceled the moment that the money was returned to the buyer from the seller. The seller returned to me step number 2. And there's no need for another kinyan. Everything got canceled at that moment. As long as Reuven is moided that he received the money, it's done. The mekach is bottle. That means if the buyer confirms that he received the money back, and if he wasn't moided that he received the money back, then the house still remains his, because we say that the sale was not, there was no transfer of ownership back from the buyer to the seller. Comes the Mata Shimon and says, how is that possible? You say that the money went back to the buyer, and therefore the house went back to the seller. But the shtar doesn't say what happened to it. The shtar is still in the hands of the buyer. So how could you say that the house got transferred back? He still has the shtar. And therefore, what happened over here? How did the kinyan happen? I mean, the question he's trying to figure out is, how did this transfer back happen? He's asking on the Rimigash. So he says, and if you're going to say that Bechal, you're only the shtar from the Rkais doesn't work for such a thing, because according to Allah it's not enough, so then the buyer never bought the house to begin with. So what got transferred? How did this guy get it back? And at the end he concludes, so he says, if you're talking about a place where you don't write a shtar, the minhag is not to write a shtar, then fine, you didn't write a shtar, you didn't transfer it, you didn't write a shtar, so the shtar in the Kosh Goyim is nothing. So Mogam Sheinagu Loi Nagu Lichtiv Shtaris. He transferred the money, that's it. But the Ri Migash is obviously talking about a place where they do write Shtaris. And therefore, he says, I don't know how he purchased it the first time, I don't know how it got transferred the second time, and he leaves it all in Tzarechiyah. Oh, he says, there must be that it was talking about a place of a shtar. He doesn't explain why. That's how he understands the story of the Ri Migash. Now, the Mishpat Shalom, to the Marasham, in Mishmeret Shalom Sifkot and Beis, brings the Maram Lublin on Kiddushin Daf Yudalad Amud Beis. The Maram Lublin over there is Medayik from Rashi. He's talking about a shifche that purchases herself into freedom. That if the original purchase was only bekesef through money, then the moment the money gets transferred back, she obtains, there's no need for another kinyan. Why? Because the same kinyan that did the first step one could do the same action which did the first transfer, could do the second transfer. But if the first transfer was money plus another kinyan, then the release also has to be money plus another kinyan. That's what Maram Lublin over there explains. The Mishpat Shalom brings it as a bederach agav, to say that when we discuss this is the shit of the Maram Lublin based on Rashi, that a transfer of ownership which occurs in a certain form as a kinyan, the Marasham adds that. This is obviously the Maram Lublin is talking about that when he gave the money b'teilas kinyan. Not that he gave it as a down payment. He gave the money b'teilas kinyan, understanding that this is going to transfer ownership. So therefore, when you reverse it, the same way you could do the same way that it went from A to B, we could go back from B to A. That's what he points out from it. This is what the Mishpat Shalom points out over here, which would explain why the Ri Migash Svare Psak does make sense. Because if you say that there was a mokim that they don't do any shtaris and they only do the kesef, so kesef one way, kesef the other way. If it's a place where the minhag mokim is you do a shtaris that shtaris you do it everything in the legal way, like here in New York or the whole America, nobody buys with the Yiddish shtaris, everybody buys with the regular contracts. Then one contract could go one way, and the give back the contract transfer could go the other way also. But whichever way you're going to do it, whatever you or the place defined as kinyan number one could also work as kinyan number two, which comes out from this what comes out from this is as follows: that to make a transfer, you use the same form of kinyan that you use from A to B could be used from B to A the same way. And therefore, you don't have to make another kinyan, according to the way he understands the Maram Lublin. Now, that's pretty... Maram Lublin, the way he understands Rashi, and the Ri Migash, without the questions of the Mata Shimon. And the Mata Shimon, the third Mata Shimon over here, on this Seif brings another din, that if there was a shtar mechira, a document which was transfer of a house from one to another, and over there was a condition. There's a certain amount of time or a certain amount of years or whatever it is that it's called a look back period in today. It means that you have a chance, you bring back the money and you retract the sale. That if there was such a thing, then, and it says over there that if the buyer brings back the money, he gets back what he bought, then he gets back what he bought. He doesn't have to have another kinyan. Why? Because the original shtar defines what's going to be the transfer one way or the other. Mata Shimon brings it, Sifkat and Gimel. But he says, but at the moment of transfer the money back, the lekeach has to rip up the old shtar. They rip up the old shtar, and that's how everything goes back to how it was before. Because essentially it's not one kinyan undoing another kinyan. It's the original kinyan has the Madrashim doesn't explain, but that's the logic behind it. The original kinyan had a condition. That means now, that's not that the first kinyan was open-ended, and now you have to make a second kinyan. The first kinyan was on this condition that if it's this and this is going to happen, then the first kinyan gets cancelled. So the only thing you have to do is rip up the shtar. Now let's continue weiter. So the Tur writes that after the purchase is done, then you can't go back. One cannot go back without making a kinyan, right? What we're discussing until now. The Bach over there writes in the name of the Rosh that the same thing applies if there is a mechila, lashon mechila, where one sells to the other, tells the other, I'm moichel to you this deal. We're moichel to each other, and we have no tainus anymore. Also doesn't work. Why? Because mechila doesn't work for a transfer of ownership, not by karka, and not by metaltalin. And the Ramah brings this, and the Ramah adds that therefore you need a new kinyan after a mechila to transfer it back from the buyer to the seller. The Smeh adds a few words. He writes a few other things, but at the end he says the same thing applies to schirus. If one rents from another person, then they want to cancel the rental in the middle. Mechila doesn't help. If the soicher was moichel did the mechila to the maskil, it doesn't help. Where does this din come from? From the Rivash. The Rivash that Ramah quotes about mechila is talking about schirus. Comes the Erech Shai, Sifkot and Aleph, and says, Erech Shai is one of the Mefarshim on Choshen Mishpat from the Achreinu, goes to the whole Choshen Mishpat. He goes as follows. Comes Reuven, sells something to Shimon with a kinyan. And Shimon didn't pay it what he has to pay. Yeah, that means they agreed on the sale, and there was no payment yet. And comes Reuven, who is the seller, comes to Shimon and says, you know what? I'm moichel to you. Let's forget about the sale. You didn't pay me. I didn't ship the product to you yet. Product remains by me. Money remains by you. Shalom al Yisrael. We're moichel each other. He says in such a case, a mechila does work. Why? Because there's no transfer of ownership yet from one of the product from one to another. What is there? There's only a shi'bud. There's only an obligation. The buyer has an obligation to pay the seller. And the seller has an obligation. Each one has a shi'bud, has an obligation to ship to the buyer. But there is no kinyan on the actual chayfetz. So to be moichel a shi'bud is enough with words. You can be moichel a shi'bud without a kinyan. But he says, but in this case, the moicher cannot go afterwards and say, well, I made a mechila by mistake, I want to change my mind, I want to continue with the sale. Once the moicher says, I'm done with it, he's done with it. But the lekeach could change his mind. That's what he says. That's how the Erech Shai starts. And he says, and we could compare it to schirus batim, to renting houses. The Maritatz, סימן Peites, says that a soicher, that means that a maskir, that means the one who rents the landlord, could be moichel to the tenant without a kinyan. But the tenant cannot be moichel to the landlord without a kinyan. That means if you want to cancel a rental, it was a rental for 12 months, and the landlord wants to say, I'm done with it. So the Maritat says the landlord could say, I'm moichel. For the skama, yeah. But for the tenant to give back the property, he has to make a kinyan. Why is that? He says like this. The Erech Shai says that the logic behind it is the same reason. The renter, the tenant, what does he have towards the masker? It means, what does the masker have? The masker has in his hand a shi'bud, an obligation that the tenant has to pay him rent. So if he wants to be moichel the shi'bud that somebody has to him, moichel lechoiv, it's fine, go be moichel lechoiv. You don't need a kinyan for that. Mechil doesn't need a kinyan. It's only a shi'bud, it's not something which is visible, it's not something which is tangible, so mechila could work for it. But the soicher, the landlord, the tenant, has a kinyan haguf, has a on the house for the time of the rental. Therefore, for him to release the kinyan haguf that he has on the rental, you have to make a kinyan. This is the whole discussion of kinyan haguf for a soicher. We're going to get into it a little bit further now, because this is. Huh? Yeah, for a year. No, he's already in there.
In other words, they didn't just masking from each other that this is going to be a year rent.
He's in there already. There's no discussion for made a kinyan or not. He's in there already. Because he's in there, and that's what effectuated the kinyan. He moved in there. He has a schirus l'zman. He moved in there.
Zman is how is zman? If I said a year, mine saying for a year is going to be because I'm doing it.
No, you agreed. You gave money. You agreed. Whichever way that was done. So it could either be a kinyan or it could be a. That's why the seicher is chayv. It's only a shibud.
So it has to be a kinyan.
But yeah, some form of transfer. Yeah, by signing a contract today, that's considered a kinyan.
Even if it's a kinyan, the master still has the right to
go. It still has the rights to go back, but the seicher has to agree, obviously, and the seicher has to make a kinyan to retract it. Yeah. So we said that the makar of the smeh is the rivash, which is what we discussed, right? The rivash, and this is what the Erech Shai is talking about. And what's this rivash? The rivash has a klal, because there's a Gemara which says that schirus is a memkar liyaima. Schirus is a purchase for a certain amount of, for days, for a certain amount of time. And the rivash takes it literally. Every schirus is a memkar liyaima. Is a sale. The time that you're renting this property, it is yours for the days for the term of the contract. Similar, which seems to imply that Imamish has a kinyan aguf. He has a ownership, a temporary ownership in the property. Machne Ephraim in Hilchis Schirus סימן Tes phrase it a little bit differently. The soicher has a kinyan to the peiros. He has a kinyan in the fruits of this house. He's enjoying this house. So because he has a kinyan in the peiros, so he has rights to the guf of the place, and therefore you need a kinyan to change it back. Hilchis Schirus סימן Tes. Yeah, so that's one way of looking at it. And the Ramban in Ksuvas Daf Nun Tes Amud Aleph seems to imply even more extreme. That he has, it's similar to what the rivash is, that the renter has a kinyan haguf in the karka also. Why? Because he was koine, because he made a kinyan for the peiros, koine the karka for the peiros, so to speak. Because he has a kinyan on the fruits, he's renting a place. So he also that created a kinyan in what generates the fruits. So he has a kinyan in the gufa karka also. Therefore, the Ramban says you could actually a renter could sell the rights during the time, sublease, and could also be makdish it during that time, for that amount of time that it's his. That's the Ramban, that's the Rivash, that's the Machne Ephraim. Maybe slight differences if it's Kinyan Aguf of the Karka or only Kinyan Aperis, which brings a Kinyan Aguf. You have the Rambam, which seems totally different. What does the Rambam say in Hilchis Chirus Perikei Halacha Hey? That if a renter wants to move out, but he has a 12-month term, so what is he supposed to do? He's supposed to find the landlord, another renter. He can't just walk away from an agreement. And so there comes the Baal Bayis, the owner, the landlord, and tells the tenant, don't worry, don't work too hard. You don't have to find anybody else. Tzei v'hanichoi. Get out and leave it. V'ata poter mischirosa, and you potter from the rent. The Rambam says if the landlord says that, the soicher is not allowed to even find another renter to replace him. He has to leave. Why? Al timna toiv mi'ba'alav. Don't prevent good from its owners. Who's the owner? The owner of the house. Which seems to imply, over here the Rambam doesn't say there's any kinyan. The Rambam just says, he told him tzei, and that's it. It's over. So there was a mechila b'dibur without a kinyan. This seems to be that the Rambam takes the approach that he has, that the most he has is a kinyan in the rights of enjoyment, but no kinyan that has a hold on the house or has a hold on the land or anything of the sort. He has no ownership rights in the physical. He has ownership rights to the hanoi, and therefore, since he has ownership rights to the hanoi, he could be meichel him without needing a kinyan. How do you get that from the Rambam? It's not my idea. The Maritatz in סימן Chelek Aleph, סימן Peites, he's the one who said what I just told you. That mechila b'dibur, the mashma from the Rambam, mechila b'dibur works and you don't need a kinyan. Maharit Tzahalon. I think his name is Yom Tov Tzahalon, right? Yeah. And the same ideas in the Mukhi Yosef, also similar to the Rambam, Bav Mesilam and Beis Amud Aleph. Then there's the Tzemach Tzedek, but we'll first get to the Nesivis. Because the Nesivis understands Taisus one way, and the Tzemach Tzedek takes it apart. So we'll start with the Nesivis. Doesn't quote the Nesivis, but takes them apart. You have the Nesivis, and Shin Yud Zayin, Biurim Sivkot and Beis. Yud Zayin, Sivkot and Beis. Shin Yud Zayin. It's not in this book. No, I'm just pointing it out to you because it's a whole different thing. Over there he discusses Taisvus, and he says that the way he understands Taisvus is that not only does he have no schus, why? Because Taisvus over there says that the din of what the Gemara says, schirus mamkar liyoimehu, that the schirus is a rental, is talking about a case of oino. That by oino, schirus is mamkar liyoimehu. Schirus is like a sale for a day. Comes the Nesivis and says, what's mashma from this? That be'etzem schirus renting is never a mamkar. By oino, we created a special din that when it comes to oino, we consider it like mamkar. But otherwise, it's nothing. So what is schirus? What's the definition of a schirus, of a renting agreement? That the landlord has an obligation, has a shibud to provide the renter the space. And that's why it says if a house falls down, he has to give him another place. Yeah, depending on how the terms are and how the deal happened. But otherwise, there's nothing. There's no kinyan. There's nothing. Not even the paytas. Only a shibud for a right to use this. For a right to use this location. That's what the Nesivis understands. So pretty much we have either there is a kinyan, he has a ownership, could be ownership in the gufa karka, like some of the Rishonim, or maybe ownership only in the peiris, or no ownership whatsoever at all, only a shibut for the ana. Tzemach Tzedek on Bava Metzia Perek Vav, Ois Beis, but not in the first section of Chidushim, but in the second half. So that means the Chidushim that were printed only in the second and the later prints. It's on page Reish Lamed Zayin, Daf Reish Lamed Zayin in the second column. It starts and it goes to the next page. So it goes through all the Rishonim on this sugya. Starts by saying that from the Rosh and Bava Metzia Siman Lamed Aleph, and other Rishonim, and also from the fact that the Alter Rebbe and Mechira, also mashma from the Alter Rebbe in Seder Mechiras Chametz, that I could be koine metaltalin agav karka which is rented. Yeah, how does a goy koine mechiras chametz? Agav karka, but doesn't say that the karka has to be owned. He's koine agav karka that's rented, right? He rents the. How does the mechiras chametz work? You're masker to him the land, the place, and he's koine agav karka. That's how the Alter Rebbe sets it up, and it's mashma from the Rosh that it works. Which is mashma, which comes out from it that the renter has a kinyan in the gufa karka, not only in the peiros. Yeah, that's shit of the Rosh and the Alter Rebbe. Then you have the Marit and Choshen Mishpat Siman's Pei Gimel. That it doesn't work. You can't be koine metaltal agav karka. The Rashba holds like the Rashba seems it does work. He brings the person the Rashba that it does work. So the Rashba is in the same team as the Rosh and the Alter Rebbe. And then he goes into, after he brings this discussion, he brings the Rivash, which we spoke about. The Rivash holds that every schirus is memker liyem as a full sale for those days. And then he says, well, but the Rivash, we have a problem. Why? Because you have this Taisvis. Same Taisvis that the Sivas brings. And the Ran understands the Taisvis that there is no kinyan, but there is a shi'abud. Similar to the Sivas. And only when it comes to Ina, at that point do we say that it's like a mechire. We compare it to mechire only for Ina, but not for anything else. That's if there was a bad deal in the rent. The same as the mechire. You make a cheschoizer up to a certain percentage, whatever it is. That since the Gemara only mentioned it regarding Oino, so obviously, since the Gemara only mentioned it regarding Oino, so the Taisvus says it only applies to that. And the Ran understands from Taisvus that means that there is no kinyan. Schirus is not a kinyan. Schirus is only a shibud. It doesn't go into the whole explanation the same way that the Sivas goes. So Tzemach says it makes no sense to say it only applies to Oino. And it doesn't make sense the way they understand Taisvus, the way the Ran understands Taisvus. The Ran understands Taisvus because the Gemara mentions it. Legabe Eino mechire. Legabe Eino, that means that only legabe Eino there is mechire. Tzemach Tzedek says no, exactly the opposite. Look at it, flip it. He says because you have. And that's how he explains the Ran, essentially how he explains the Ran also. Because the guy has a shibud to give you anoe, and because you received anoe that you're able to enjoy the peiros, that makes it into a memkar, into a mechire, that you own it. Because there was this deal that I'm getting from you this amount to enjoy the property, I'm getting from you the peiros, I have a kinyan on this, on these fruits, on this thing. So it becomes like a memkar, becomes like a sale, becomes like a purchase. If it becomes like a purchase, obviously there's Oino. Not that because there is Oino, not that only by Oino there is that. He says, no, Taisvus is trying to tell you, why does it mean that he says that by Oino, that this Gemara is talking about Oino? He's telling you because there is a shibud to make hanoi, because there is a hanoi makes a kinyan. Because there is a kinyan, it becomes like a memkar. Because it becomes like a memkar, therefore there's a no. And he says, and this is more than stam shibud. Elamai, he says, but he doesn't get a ownership rights in the actual karka. That means the soicher has a kinyan in the gufa peiros, but not in the gufa karka, according to Taisvus. He has a kinyan peiros. So that's how he, and therefore, lav dafke, that he could be makdashit for that amount of time. But he still could be kohen agav karka. But he can't be makdashit. He doesn't have as much ownership rights like it was mashma before. According to the Rosh, according to the Ramban. According to the Ramban, he could be makdashit.
So the Ramban is more extreme than the Rosh?
So as I cooked ice, yeah. Which means, so now let's go back to what we discussed before. That, because essentially we have a machlekes. We have from the Rambam, the way the Maritatz understands the Rambam is that you don't need a kinyan for Mechila. That you don't need, that Mechila does work, Mechila B'dibur works to cancel a schirus. The Smek clearly writes, based on the Rivash, that's the Rivash that Rama brings, that Mechila needs a kinyan for schirus. So therefore, how does it work? When do you need a Mechila with a kinyan? When you consider that the original schirus is also a kinyan. So therefore, whether you follow the shittas that say that the original schirus is a kinyan for the guf, or you say that they say that schirus is a kinyan only for the peiros, but you have an ownership in something. So if you have an ownership in something, means you have a kinyan in it. Therefore, to be able to make a mechila, to transfer ownership back of gufa karka or gufa peiros, you need a kinyan. But those who say that it's shibud, you don't need to. Now you could argue that those that say that you need kinyan peiros, that only have kinyan peiros, since it's only a kinyan in the hanoah, you don't need a kinyan either to retract it. But you have a Shir L'Meishav in Tlisa Chelik Bey Siman Ches, that he says no, you still need a kinyan you still need a kinyan for a mechila, even for kinyan peiros, to retract it. Why? Because how does he define schirus? The Shir L'Meishav, an interesting way of defining schirus. A schirus means that the masker takes from the soicher money, which at that point prevents him from having hanoah and allows the other person to have hanoah. The soicher now has hanoah. The masker is now banned from having hanoah from his own property, and that is a kinyan peiros, even though you're not calling it a kinyan peiros. So therefore, because you have this, that you created this ownership, the Shir L'Meishav says you have to make a kinyan to be mevatel it. Anyways, that's regarding this nekuda of schirus. Now let's go back to the Erech Shai, because we went off from the Erech Shai. The Erech Shai brings this maritatz about the renting of the houses. That the masker could be moichel without a kinyan. The seicher cannot, because the seicher has a kinyan aguf. Comes Erech Shai and says, based on this maritatz, you have a new din. If there was only a shtar between a buyer and a seller, going back to buyer and seller to buy a specific thing, and he says, I'm going to buy from you this and this amount, and there was no transfer of actual schayra, then the kohen could be moichel without a kinyan, the moicher could be moichel without a kinyan. There's nothing. There's no transfer of anything, so you don't need a kinyan to change it back. The shibud is on the bodies of the people. The body of the moicher has a shibud to sell, and the body of the buyer has a shibud to buy. Not only that, he says, and even if you will say that, and even if you say that, so what's the mechila worth over here? The mechila is only mechila shibud. And by Emes he says the seller doesn't have to do mechila. He could go. Let's say he says, I'm gonna order for you. I'm selling you 2 trucks of potatoes. He takes the 2 trucks of potatoes. He sells it to somebody else. He still wasn't mevatel a shibud, because now he could just take another 2 trucks of potatoes from somewhere else and send it to this guy. So there's no shibud on specific schayra, there's no shibud on specific thing, there's a shibud on the person. Shibud on the person could be cancelled with a dibur.
They made a kinin to buy the stay?
Yeah, they made a kid, whatever they did, doesn't make a difference, they made a shtar. They made a contract of sale. But the contract of sale didn't create yet the transfer of the 2 trucks of potatoes or the transfer of money. Only a shibud from each one to the other one. Then the Erech Shai brings another din on this, concludes, this is how the Erech Shai concludes on this, and he says that if the both sides, let's say they made it was supposed to be mechila with a kinyan, and they wrote a shtar to each other that neither of them has tainus one to another. They write a shtar, we're moide that each one of us is moide that we don't have tainus to the other person anymore. Ein lo tainus al zeh yesed, lo zal zeh v'lo zal zeh. And they both are moide, and there was no kinyan done to be mevatel the original kinyan. The Erech Shai says that the shtar still works. Why? Because this works as a kinyan oidisa, kinyan oidol. Oidisa also works that both, if we have the lashon of their moide that they have no tainus anymore in each other, it's a kinyan oidisa. It's like a kinyan oidisa, and it works as a kinyan. But you have to write specifically that lashon, I am moide to you that I have no tainus against you. And he brings the rimigash which Shemata Shimon brought about that when you transfer back the money, you don't have to, no more action has to happen, and he says he doesn't hold of it. He says the rimigash says that by transferring the money back, it's considered a kinyan. He says no, that's not what the reason is. The rimigash psak is right, but his logic is wrong. That's how the Erech Shai, essentially, the Erech Shai explains it. That means by transferring the money, what happens is that they were mevatel the original mekach. Yeah, they wanted to cancel the original mekach. So that Shulchan Aruch clearly writes it doesn't work. So the rimigash svare that by transferring it would only work in a scenario where that was the original kinyan. But otherwise he says no, the rimigash that just transferring back money, returning the money is enough to change, to cancel the original deal or to create a new kinyan, doesn't work either way. Good, this is part 1. Yeah, summary of this. Now, let's take a step back from the details of this siman. Let's go understand what a kinyan is, because the next 30 simanim are talking about it. What does a kinyan do? What is a kinyan? How does a kinyan work? Because we know until now that there's certain scenarios do not need a kinyan. The mechila is enough. Certain times you need gemiras das. Yeah. Also, you have to make a decision in your mind that things change. And there's a isur if you retract it, if you already started Reish Daled, you know that there's certain scenarios. There's a gemiras das, a decision. So Shas Tshuvas Tuv Tam Vadas to Rav Shlomo Kluger Chelik Aleph Siman Ayin Siman Reish Ayin. How does he defines a kinyan as follows? You understand the definition of a kinyan. Iker ha'hakna hu belev. The idea of a kinyan is in your heart. Shegoymer u'makne. The seller makes a full decision in his heart that he's going to transfer this to somebody else. V'akinyan havi rak levarer daitoi. The kinyan is a proof of his gemiras das. That means the act of a kinyan is not what is proves that you wanted to transfer something to somebody else. So it's not, it's an action, it's a maaseh, but it's only as a proof to something which you already did in your heart. He says, taka wouldn't work, halachically without it, just gemiras das is not enough to transfer something to somebody else. But the ikar kinyan is in your heart when you make that decision, and if you gomer or makne beliboy, that the kinyan only comes afterwards. The maisa kinyan is only there to as a proof, as a bidder, to prove that this is that a transfer of ownership happened. Yeah, that's a tuftam vadah's interesting definition. But when does a transfer of ownership occur? Yeah, it's clear from the Shulchan Aruch that the fact I could say if by saying is not enough, thinking in my heart I'm going to transfer to something for sure doesn't create a transfer of ownership. Gmirus das, Begomer Beliba is nothing. Just you need an act of a kinyan wherever the kinyan is in this place. There's no minig in any place that a Gmirus das in your own lave transfers ownership to somebody else. If you made a firm decision that you're going to transfer this to somebody else, it still doesn't effectuate. In any location, any minig doesn't effectuate anything. So what is it that the kinyan is? According to Tuftam Vadas, the kinyan is just proves what you already made a decision on. So let's look at a nesivis, which is in your book. In Siman Kuf Tzadik Zayin, the Urim Sifkot and Dal. If you want to look at it, I'm not going to go through it now, it's a long nesivis, but you could look at it. I'm just taking one paragraph out of it. In the middle, I think is the third paragraph. The nesivis, as it defines, every kinyan has to have a das koine and das makne. Everybody knows that. You have to have the das of the makne to sell, and the das of the koine to acquire. And there has to be a kavane l'shem kinyan. There has to be a kavane that you're going to do a kinyan. The nesivis paskins, very interesting nesivis, that when you have an umdana, the bezdin can have an umdana that a certain person, a seller, would for sure have been maskim to this sale. It works, and the koine was bought, and the koine bought it. If you have an umdana in such a scenario, it's enough to create a transfer of ownership. It means obviously the seller, the buyer did his part, and the seller, we're not exactly sure if there was a kinyan from his part also. If there's an umdana, it's enough for the seller, not for the buyer. Umdana only works from the seller to the buyer, not from the buyer to the seller. Huh? Not from the seller to the buyer. Huh?
A buyer would never get money if he doesn't have
the seller. So he says, because the seller has to have a maisa kinyan and a kavana. The buyer has to have a maisa kinyan and a kavana. But the seller has to have a kavana. Which comes out from the Sivis, how he defines a kinyan, that a kinyan is a maisa of the koine. Who does the kinyan? The koine is doing a maisa to take it from the moicher. But to be able to make a kinyan on something which belongs to the moicher, you have to have the das makne. You have to have the askama of the makne. Or at least a clear umdana that the makna is ready to release it. So umdana helps for a thought. The umdana doesn't help for an action. So the koine has to make an action. So umdana with the garnish elfen. But the umdana on the thought does work. Which means that the way the sword of the nesivis seems like, and also from the Tuftam Vadas, to a certain degree, that the seller, that the kinyan is an action of the lekeach, of the buyer taking something, and the owner releasing ownership, allowing the lekeach to take ownership. It's not that he's transferring anything, he's pulling back and allowing the lekeach to take ownership. And for me to be able to take ownership of something that belongs to you, you have to allow me to do it. But you don't have to do any action on your part. Your thought is enough. Your agreement is enough. So that's why the Gmirus Das is really what releases your hold on this product and allows me to make a kinyan. For me to make a kinyan, all I have to do is that, because really a kinyan should work on anything. Yeah, Gazlan is also kind of. in certain scenarios. Yeah, makes a kinyan. So, but if you want to make a kinyan that you don't have to return afterwards, then you have to have the das of the makne also. So whatever the reason the makne was masking to it, whether the makne was masking because he's receiving money, whether the makne is masking because he decided to give it to him as a gift, or whatever it is, he allows the koine to make a kinyan in his thing. That's the kinyan. So therefore, the kinyan is a proof to the thought of the makne. And the kinyan is the action of the koine. So therefore, this explains to you why, when you have something which never came into the hands of the koine, like the seller, what the Erech Shai discussed, that the seller agreed to sell, and the buyer agreed to buy, and there was a mechila, and the Erech Shai says you don't need a kinyan. Either way, why don't you need a kinyan? Because there's no transfer of ownership now. That means there was a thought on one side, there was a thought on the other side. To cancel a thought, you don't need a kinyan. To cancel a thought, you also don't need a kinyan. The only time you need a kinyan is when someone takes possession. So when the makne, when person A sold it to person B and he took possession, he made a kinyan by taking possession, the person B. So now when person A wants it back and he wants to cancel it, mechil is not enough, because now person B has to release it, and person A has to make a kinyan to take it back. But if it's only the agreement, the person A released it in his mind that he's going to give it to person B, and then person B is Michael and released it is going to go back to him. It's not a problem. So you only need and now if they're going to do it, if there's no ownership, if there's never a taking of possession of the actual physical chayfetz, then you don't need a kinyan to transfer it back. So when I made a kinyan, when person A wanted to give it to person B, he released it in his mind. So mechila works. When person B agreed to buy it, also mechila works. That's why by dibur, what's the law? Why is nothing happens over here? Because could be that I released it in my mind for you to make a kinyan, but you didn't make a kinyan yet. So until you made a kinyan, until the transaction completed, that you took possession of it, yes, I released it with the idea that you could do it, but I didn't give it to you. You didn't take possession of it. So therefore, I could cancel it with my thought. And therefore, fits is what Tzemach Tzedek says, that tfis is not going to help anything. If you're going to grab it after, it's not going to help anything. Why not? Because the dibur was mevatel machshava. The original machshava went out the window. Therefore, if I'm going to come and do tfis afterwards, I'm stealing. Why? Because my machshava to allow you to do a kinyan, I cancel that machshava bedibur or dibur. So maybe I should get a mishapara, get a mechosar aman, or whatever it is. But you cannot go now and do tfisa when I didn't do my part as the makne. I retracted what I did. So mechosar aman, mishapara, whatever it is. But I retracted my half of the deal, my part of releasing it. I released it in my mind, I took it back in my mind. Yeah, that's if you want to look at it from that kav of the Tuftan Vadas and the Sivis, that they define a kinyan that essentially is an action, only a one-sided action from the koine, not from the makne.
But also, what's the lekech stated there? What's the lekech stated there? And the mechanic is put in his hand.
Or you could look at it differently. You have the Beis Ephraim defines it differently. Beis Ephraim, Yeridei Siman Samach Vav. Over there it seems in the Beis Ephraim that a kinyan is the action. It's not a proof of a thought, it's not a proof of what happened, it's the actual action. Talking, thinking, even a full agreement, 100% of my mind I'm going to do it, is only an obligation. It says chayvus. I obligated myself to do something. And therefore he says, sometimes you could be meshabed yourself to do something so strongly that you cannot go back on it. But it's only a shi'bud. It's not a transfer of ownership. If someone commits to do something, with whichever way he has to do it, yeah, he might not be able to retract on his word, commit to do something. But it doesn't mean that before he does it, the other person receives it. Why? Because that I have an obligation to do something is not part of the kinyan. The kinyan is that I am giving you and you're taking. It's two parts of the kinyan. Every kinyan has to include a ma'aseh from the kohen and a ma'aseh from the makna. And if there is no ma'aseh from both sides, then there's no kinyan. And there's no transfer. And you have to have a ma'aseh from both sides. Each person has to do his part. Same thing is also in the Marasham, in Chelik Bey, Siman Reish Chav Daled, and in Chelik Gimel, Siman Shin Yud Ches. But Gemilas Das is nothing. If you need anytime you need a kinyan midina, the Marasham says, anytime you need a kinyan apidin, the fact that you made a full decision in your mind to transfer and everything doesn't change anything. Only the action is the kinyan. He says only something which does not need a kinyan al pidin, the Marasham says, over there you could argue if Gemilas Das is enough to transfer or not. But the whole act of transferring ownership, it's not that one releases and one takes it. No, both sides. I give it to you and you take it. And therefore, if something is not this, therefore, let's go back to the same erech shayt we talked about. If the product, if the thing is not in the hands of the other person, obviously you can't transfer back from one. Obviously you don't need the kinyan. And even mechila you don't need, really. Ba'atzim you don't need the mechila. Why? Because no action was done, and no transfer of ownership was done. Elamai, what does the mechila help you? Sachakol, to relieve yourself of the mishapara. But when there's a transfer from one to another, then you have to, and you need an action from both parties. Now, how does Alter Rebbe begin the Siman? Huh? What? There's enough community. I just want to explain to you the different ways. There's no enough community between any of them. What is the logic behind the kinyan? I said we're done with the halach. Let's go back to halach. The Alter Rebbe begins the first halacha in the first siman of Choshen Mishpat of the Alter Rebbe. Starts with, so yeah, we would think, he starts with the halacha, 5 words from siman Kuf Peites, and then jumps to siman Reish Daled. So the Shulchan Aruch starts with Eina Mekach Negam Bedvarim, and that's, the Alter Rebbe says no. Af al pi she'eina Mekach Negam Bedvarim bilvad. Even though the Alter Rebbe converts into the whole how you should behave. Even though the Mekach is not, it's also in you, if you have any spirals, it's also there. Even though the Mekach is not completed by talking alone. And every person has a right to retract from his words. And even in Mishapara you don't get if he didn't transfer money. Whoever changes his mind and retracts is mechusar amana. It's the Isur, right? What Isur is there? I said the Rabbanan, the Chayr is the Rabbanan. Why? Because Alter Rebbe continues, Ein ruach chachamim neichayimenu. Ein ruach chachamim neichayimenu. The Shulchan Aruch says, lo yasam ma'aseh Yisrael. He didn't act like a Jew. The Alter Rebbe says, Ein ruach chachamim neichayimenu. Chachamim are not happy with him. It means it's at least the Isur the Rabbanan. Why? Ki roi la'adam lamad b'dibure. Because it's befitting for a person to keep to his word. Moshe Kosuv she'eris Yisrael lo yasu avla. That the Yidden are not going to do avla. Now, Alter Rebbe then continues, Yirei Shamayim, yesh loi lekayim afilu machshavas liboy. Yirei Shamayim should fulfill, doesn't say yachmir al atzmo, it doesn't say b'mokim she'efsher, it says yesh loi. Should be mekayim even what he thinks in his heart. שאם חושב וגומר בליבו למכור לי בסכום זה, yeah, if he made in mind, if he decided in his heart that he's going to sell for this price, and the other person didn't even know about his thought, that means the seller agreed, I'm selling it for $2,000. The buyer didn't know it's $2,000. And the buyer came and paid $2,500. Only take what you agreed in your mind that you're going to sell it for. Like it says in your heart, keep the truth in your heart. Also lekeach, which made a gmirus das, also should not retract it. Should not go back on what he did. Yeah? Now, what does it mean, Gomar Beliboy? Just an interesting thing you should know, because people are going to take, well, I thought about it. It means you made a clear decision that you're going to do it this and this way. And that's it. That's considered Gemiras Das. Just because I thought, I was going through my mind, and I said, no, maybe I'll sell the house maybe I'll sell this for $2,000. It's not enough. Gemiras Das means I sat and I thought about it and I came to the conclusion that this is my price. Came to the conclusion this is my price, then I shouldn't retract. Huh?
Put this in the market for this price?
Yes. Kenzine, unless you made in mind that this is my bottom price and I want to go for an auction, it's something else. It's talking about when I made a decision I'm going to sell it to this person, not to put it in the market. No, because it says if the other Keninim didn't know about it.
It's only by Mechira, right? Not Matana?
Matana is later. Yeah, it's on the same, even more, but Matana even more. But sometimes you have to give even for a poor person a big Matana, small Matana, it's the next sifim. Anything between Adam and Chaver, he says, you have to be mekayim what you said. If you had in mind to do a favor to your friend, and you're able to do it. But then Alter Rebbe adds, you come to a full agreement that you're going to do something for your own sake. If it doesn't have even any slight connection to a mitzvah, even if you said you're going to do something, you don't have to fulfill. You don't have to do it. Even if you didn't say bli neder, I'm going to go out to a restaurant tonight. Okay. You don't have to be mekayim. There's no serach mitzvah. If you go yourself, there's no serach mitzvah. If you go for your wife, it's a shalom bayis, it's a simach chesishte. But if you go yourself, then there's no serach mitzvah over there. The Alter Rebbe discussed it over there also. No, that's in Shabbos. The Alter Rebbe discussed it. Now, so the Alter Rebbe says, Yerei Shemaim Yeshloi, and Yeshloi and Yeshloi. Now, it's pretty much clear that it's a chiyuv. What happens if you think you're not a Yerei Shemaim? It's a big problem that you have. However, let's leave that aside. The Farbrengen from the Rebbe Vov Tishrei Tovshin Mem Zayin. This is Va'aduya Yisrael Aleph, page 87 onwards. It's a Yisrael's Dikasicha on how to understand, how to read the Alter Rebbe. It's about Prusbul. Then he goes into this halacha soon. We're going to get to it soon when he says about these halachas. The Alter Rebbe says, when the Alter Rebbe says, the Rebbe says, when the Alter Rebbe writes, Yerei Shemaim Yachmir La'atzmai, the Lashon, it's a built to Mugli, Medayik, but this is a Chocha, She'inyan Zeh Shaykh L'kol Echad V'echad Mi'Yisrael. It's a proof. Hisvaduya is Tovshim Mem Zayin Chelik Aleph, page 67. Sichas Vov Tishrei. So that means even the Rebbe says, Gamim b'shar inyonim isnaig al derech hamitzua. Even if other things you're not exactly going on the highest level. Yesh lo hayro nesinas koyach lisnaig b'inyon zek Yerei Shemaim. If the Alter Rebbe says Yerei Shemaim yachmir la'atzma, you have every yid has the power, the koyach, and he has in the sinas koyach to act like a Yerei Shemayim. That's when it says Yachmir La'atzmai. Here it says Yeshloi, which is even stronger. Yeah, let's continue another 2 points from this Alter Rebbe.
But the thing is, if you're going to do it, it's not intention of let's say someone married, it's intention of his wife and kids.
No, you don't do anything on cheshbon of other people. Can't be a tzaddik on somebody else's cheshbon.
No, that's the thing. Any of these things.
That's an aveda. It's a serach aveda. It's not a serach mitzvah. It's a hefech of a serach mitzvah. Siv Beis Alter Rebbe continues. Someone says, I'm going to give you a present, and he's mechusri amana, also mechusri amana. And the Alter Rebbe over there says it's only matana mu'etes. And then the Alter Rebbe explains it's talking about a rich person. Why? By matana mu'etes, samchot daitei shel mekabel kashivtichoi. The person who's expecting the gift, samchot daitei, was already relying that he's going to get it. What if it's a big matana? No. Why? Because he didn't believe that he's going to actually get it until he actually sees that he's getting it. And Alter Rebbe concludes, Mikol Mokai, when you make a decision that you're going to do it, when you say that you're going to give it to him, do it b'das gemura, don't have in mind to change it. To say something while having in mind not to do it, just to show off or whatever it is, asur min ha'Torah. Here it becomes asur min ha'Torah. It's not asur min ha'Rabban like mechusar amana before. Huh? And if b'das gemura, it says you have to do it, but over there it says if you don't do it mechusar amana, ein lo chacham neicha imenu. Over here it says asur min ha'Torah for by matana. Shenemar eifas tzedek v'hin tzedek yeh. The pasuk, the Gemara says, "Ma Talmud lemer hin tzedek, alehin b'chlal eifa." Why do you have to say eifas tzedek and hin tzedek? The both measurements say the same. Elo sheyehei hein shelcha tzedek v'lav shelcha tzedek. Your yes should be a yes, tzedek should be real, and your no should also be real. If you look in Alter Rebbe and Siman Kuf Nun Vav Sif Beis, Alter Rebbe over there says you have to be careful shelo yachlif as diburei, not to change what you said. Kuf Nun Vav Sif Beis, Alter Rebbe. Shenemar v'hin tzedek yeh lecha. Yeah, we bring the same thing. Sheyehein shelcha tzedek v'lav shelcha tzedek. Kloimar, which means to say, Kashe'ato medaber heinoi lav, when you do something, say you're going to do something, or say you're not going to do something, kayim dvarecha v'hatzedek oisam. He explains it more. He says, what does it mean? Hein shelcha tzedek. When you do it, make sure, when you say something, make sure follow through till the end. That's what it means, not only in the thought process. In Choshen Mishpat, the Alter Rebbe says, when you think, make sure you have a full thought, not to do it to the end. And then Rechaim over there, the Alter Rebbe says more than that. What does Hein Tzedek mean? Yeah, go through it till the end. Yeah, then Sif Gimel, Sif Dal, Alter Rebbe goes into a little bit more details on it. We're not going to get into it right now. Now, question. Why is over here the Issa Deraisa before the Issa Derabbanan? Yeah? Why? Why is Mechusar Amon and Sif Aleph a Derabbanan and Mechusar Amon and Sif Beis a Deraisa? It should be the same Yisr. One way, why is Deraisa by both, Derabbanan by both? The difference is because over here there was a Gmirus Das also by the receiver. He's convinced that he's going to receive it, and he relied on it. And therefore, when somebody goes back on it, it's going back on your word is much stronger. Mashenkin, the first one, when it's on a sale, contract of sale, neither of them has 100% Gmirus Das that's going to go through. Right? They want it to go through. But what happens if the guy doesn't have money to pay for it? It's not going to go through. We made a deal. I have to come up with $1 million to buy a house, or $2 million. What if I don't come up with a mortgage? Can't do anything about it. I can't buy the house. So there's a Gmirus Das that we want to get this done. So Gmirus Das, we want to get this done. If it doesn't happen, you're not going against Hin Tzedek. I tried, it didn't work. So therefore, if it's not, by not going against it, Moses, Ein lo chacham neicha imenu. But when I made a decision, I told someone I'm going to give him a present. So now in my mind, it's a full giving. In his mind, it's a full receiving. Now I'm going to retract it, I'm just going against the Hin Tzedek. That's what it seems like. And therefore, that also explains the rest of the Sifim, Sif Gimel, Sif Daled, and the Siman also, where you say, that's what we say, that by Ani, if you tell me you're going to give him a matana meruba, a big matana, by Asher, only a small matana, he's not expecting a big matana from you. But by Ani, he's relying on your big matana or small matana, you have to keep your word. Like at the end of Sif Daled, the Alter Rebbe says, if you say you're going to give a matana to a poor person, even if it's a big matana, Eino yochel lachzer b'minadin. דיני, you're not allowed to retract your statement. מפני שנייסה כנדר, becomes a neder. ואפילו גומר בליבוי. And even if you didn't tell him, you just go on believe. צריך לקיים מחשבתי. You have to fulfill your thoughts. כמו שהסבר בחזקה, we don't have a חזקה from Alter Rebbe.
What do you do in a show? You want to give money to a guy collecting money, and then you guys
So, nothing. The guy left. What are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? You decide you're going to give towards a certain project. And then by the time you got around to it, the chayla became a nifta. What are you going to do? Nothing. You can't help them with bigger chayla anymore. You can't help them with medical expenses. Most you could do is maybe they'll start a new campaign. You change your mind then. You can't, there's certain things you can't do. If the guy's not there, the guy's not there. I mentioned the Sikha Vav Tishrei, right? So over there, the Rebbe discusses the Alter Rebbe and Pruzbul, and then the Rebbe goes into these halachas, brings this hin tzedek, this halacha of hin tzedek, not to change your mind, and he brings what says in סימן Kufnun Vav that I just mentioned to you. First, the Rebbe explains what the Rambam says. This is in page 69 onwards. Before it's page 67. It's like the whole Sikha is like 6 or 7 pages. And page 69, and he brings what the Alter Rebbe says, and brings סימן Kufnun Vav. And over there, so the Rebbe explains what I told you before, that the Isur, that the Chiyuv of Hein Tzedek is not only like in Choshen Mishpat, it says that at the time of saying, you have to have in mind, you have to have a day of Gemura, a full thought that you're going to give it to him. That if you're going to retract it, is Asur Medina. But also includes the second part, that afterwards, when you fulfill it, you're mekayim this idea of hin tzedek and the hein shelcha yeh tzedek and lav shelcha yeh tzedek. It means in the Choshen Mishpat, the Alter Rebbe only says when you say something in your mind, have in mind to follow through with it. Why? Because if not, you're over the isur deraisa of hin tzedek, hein shelcha. When you thought about it. In Kufnun Vav, the Alter Rebbe adds a few more words. That the Hin Tzedek is not only, it says, when you make a decision that you're going to do it. And then make sure to follow through with it, so that way it should be Hin Tzedek. So the Rebbe just points out. Huh? You don't have to come in. The Rebbe just points out that it adds, this mitzvah, this chiyuv of Hin Tzedek also includes the fulfillment of it, not only in the thought process. Could be if you have aynus, yeah. So that's why, now you understand why I put סימן Reish Daled after סימן Kuf Peites, because the Alter Rebbe starts it and goes from Kuf Peites to Reish Daled, even though Reish Daled Be'etzim is not a hemshech to Kuf Peites. It is to a certain degree, but to understand Reish Daled, the opening of Reish Daled is a hemshech to all the dinim of metaltalin, but metaltalin are not nikne bekesef, and therefore it says that when you get a mishapora. But the reason I put Reish Daled afterwards is because it's a continuation to this topic. With that, we conclude the first share.